On Capitol Hill, FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell was questioned about the firing of an employee who told staff to avoid homes that had Trump campaign signs in the aftermath of Hurricane Milton. Lawmakers also ask about misinformation regarding aid relief, FEMA funding, and concerns about partisan politics in distributing aid. The hearing before the House Oversight Committee is about 4 hours.
This hearing of the Committee on Oversight and Accountability will come to order. I want to welcome everyone here today. Sorry we're getting late. Votes extended about 15 minutes longer than they were supposed to. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I now recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Today marks our first hearing since the election, in which President Trump won in a landslide. This summer, Ranking Member Raskin described Republicans as a, quote, shrinking, shriveling minority party. They're a cult of personality, and there's not many people who are buying the cult and dogma anymore, end quote. Yet just 2 weeks ago, President Trump received historic support from Americans of all races, religions, and backgrounds. It's clear the American people aren't buying what the Democrats and their allies in the media are selling anymore. For nearly a decade, Democrats, many of whom are in this room today, have demonized the millions of Americans who support President Trump. I think of the proud Americans in my district, good neighbors, citizens, and God-fearing individuals. They're tired of being called trash, cult followers, fascists, Nazis, and many other horrific names for simply loving their country and supporting President Trump. My constituents want the cost of living to stop skyrocketing, whether it's food, gas, heating their homes. They want the border sealed to stop the flow of illegals and criminal aliens coming to our communities. And they want to end the weaponization of government. Unfortunately, we have recently seen a disturbing example of this weaponization of government on full display. In the wake of Hurricane Milton, at least one FEMA official engaged in political discrimination against supporters of President Trump. This official ordered employees to discriminate against vulnerable Americans affected by a hurricane when they needed assistance the most. This same employee alleged on TV that this was not an isolated event and that FEMA essentially treats the homes of President Trump supporters as if they were homes of people with vicious dogs. This is unacceptable. Americans demand accountability. Today's hearing provides members and the American people the opportunity to get answers about these troubling developments that have overshadowed FEMA's critical mission. While today's hearing will focus on FEMA, the issue at hand is part of a larger problem: the urgent need to hold the unelected, unaccountable federal workforce accountable to the American people and the duly elected President of the United States. In his first term, President Trump faced not only open insubordination from federal employees who refused to help implement his policies, but also subtler practices intended to thwart elements of his agenda. And we're already hearing through media reports that some federal employees from DOD, EPA, and of course DOJ are already plotting to thwart President Trump's agenda when he is sworn in as president in January. The current system does not have strong enough mechanisms to ensure accountability. The disciplinary system is run by and for civil servants to protect civil servants. President Trump has pledged to take action to bring accountability to the federal workforce and ensure there are measures in place to appropriately deal with poor performers and those who actively resist implementing the policies of a duly elected president. And he will have strong allies in the Republican members of this House Oversight Committee. Democrats claim President Trump is trying to politicize the civil service, but situations like the one at FEMA validate our concerns that it is already politicized. Under the Biden-Harris administration, the civil service has not only grown in size, but also in power. And this power is evident. Just ask the people in Highlands County, Florida. They needed help, but at least one FEMA official used her power to make help harder to get. We only know this because one whistleblower was brave enough to come forward, but others knew about this and said nothing. And FEMA leadership didn't take action against this supervisor until the press exposed the discrimination. More importantly, FEMA officials did not immediately end the discrimination. Since being fired, this supervisor has made multiple media appearances claiming she was following direction from above and that this practice is widespread. So, the question is this. From FEMA's perspective, was her main offense not only saying the quiet part out loud, but that she put it in writing? Who knows how many victims of Florida were left out of rapid disaster relief response? And what about other areas of the country? How long has this gone on and where? It is not acceptable for anyone to threaten the life or safety of FEMA employees, and FEMA does not protect its people, but this does not justify writing off a huge segment of the population. I'm eager to hear from the administrator today about the status of FEMA's disaster relief efforts, as well as how we can prevent further discrimination. I want to thank you, Administrator, for being here today, and I now yield to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your victory, and thank you for your magnanimous statement at the beginning. I know you're proud of the 4 million vote majority, which the President-elect seems to have now, just as we were proud of the 7 million vote majority that Joe Biden had 4 years ago. The difference, of course, is that we acknowledge the loss of our candidate in this election, and we're not involved in trying to overturn the election or the Constitution, but we accept the Constitution and we accept the victory of the President-elect. Now, thank you for calling this hearing today. As of last month, more than 300 Americans had lost their lives to the hurricanes. Millions of people across the Southeast have had their lives uprooted, their families displaced, and their communities ravaged by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Friends of my family were forced from their home in Asheville, North Carolina, and they came to stay with us in Maryland for several weeks following this nightmare. And we closely tracked the recovery effort, which has been unceasing and determined, even though aid was still too slow in getting into some communities. FEMA is America's lifeline in disasters like these, coordinating rapid response and recovery efforts with state and local first responders and rescue agencies. In these hurricanes, FEMA deployed swiftly, providing survivors with temporary shelter, debris removal, and other emergency measures, including the $750 for serious needs assistance for individuals to get items like food, water, baby formula, and medicine. FEMA's disaster work is not conducted by a unitary force of full-time federal government employees, but rather a dynamic team of emergency responders and agencies drawn from across the country, which includes federal, state, and local workers, full-time and part-time employees, and private contractors. Two of my own constituents, Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service Captains Josh Kurland and Dave Hutchinson, went south with rescue teams to help communities hit by Hurricane Helene. FEMA workers from around America help their fellow Americans get back on their feet after a disaster like this. Now, even in the heat of the presidential election, Mr. Chairman, FEMA's response won high praise from leaders across the political spectrum. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin said, quote, "I'm incredibly appreciative of the rapid response and the cooperation from the team at FEMA." Florida Governor DeSantis said, quote, "Everything we've asked for from President Biden, he has approved." And our Florida colleague, Congresswoman Luna, said, "As I'm seeing, FEMA has been very helpful, and I've been in direct communication with them, and they're absolutely going to assist because President Biden has told them to do so." So we could be here today celebrating the workforce of 22,000 FEMA workers, but instead we're invited to focus on one so-called intermittent employee in Florida whose team encountered what she called political hostility while canvassing door-to-door for FEMA in Florida. Thereupon, as I understand it, she made the judgment that her workers were unsafe, and she issued the order to her team not to go to any more houses in the neighborhood where there were Trump signs planted in the yard. This was a bad mistake, legally and constitutionally, which violated the core mission of FEMA and every federal agency to work on behalf of all Americans. It's plainly wrong and divisive to use a presidential campaign lawn sign as a proxy for someone's dangerousness. The director of FEMA, who's with us today, Ms. Criswell, properly acted immediately within 36 hours of learning of the incident because this action was an egregious departure from the norms of nonpartisanship which must govern the conduct and the work of the federal workforce. Federal workers have a duty to serve all Americans regardless of their political identification. FEMA's prompt and unequivocal personnel action in this case is powerful evidence that the civil service system is working, not only to deliver quality public service, but also to correct employee errors and ensure that the people whose homes were skipped, as in this case, receive outreach and assistance. And I understand that there were 20 homes that were skipped and then they were immediately addressed afterwards, but I want to ask about that. Now, none of this is to deny for a moment that in recent months, FEMA aid workers have been forced to work under a cloud of propaganda and lies concocted to erode public trust in FEMA. Because of this disinformation, many victims of hurricanes have rejected federal assistance, and others have even harassed and threatened FEMA workers. As Republican Congressman Chuck Edwards, who represents Asheville, North Carolina, said, all the misinformation has been, quote, not just unhelpful, but it's been harmful. I agree with my Republican colleagues and Administrator Criswell. Federal agencies must serve all Americans, and that means a federal workforce of nonpartisan professionals hired based on competence and merit. What's true of FEMA canvassers is, of course, true of the rest of the government. We need government for all the people, regardless of political viewpoint. President-elect Trump has promised to be a president for all Americans, and I hope he delivers on that. And if he falls short of it, I trust all my colleagues will hold him to it. In his first administration, President Trump all too often deliberately directed disaster aid based on the party politics of local leadership and past electoral performance, not the needs of the community and disaster survivors. In 2017, his administration denied 99% of the aid that North Carolina's Democratic governor requested as part of cleanup efforts after Hurricane Matthew. Also in 2017, after Hurricane Maria, President Trump blocked the full release of emergency assistance to Puerto Rico that was appropriated by us in Congress due to his unfounded belief that the destruction and death toll had been inflated to make him look bad. In 2018, after California suffered the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in its history, President Trump initially refused to approve disaster aid because of the state's liberal Democratic leanings. He reportedly later changed his mind after his staff provided him data showing that there were more Trump voters in Orange County, California, than there were in the entire state of Iowa. Now is the right time for all of us, Mr. Chairman, and I mean this, for all of us to agree that nobody in public office, no matter how high nor how low, should play partisan politics with disaster relief in the age of climate change. Thank you for convening today's hearing so we can stand together and reaffirm our commitment to the idea that government exists to serve all of our citizens and to commend the devoted federal workers who work day in and day out to serve all of our people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, Representative Stubbe of Florida and Representative McCormick of Georgia are waived onto the committee for the purpose of questioning the witness at today's hearing. I'm pleased now to introduce today's witness. Ms. Deanne Criswell has served as Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency since 2021. She has spent much of her career in emergency management, having previously served as Commissioner of the New York City Emergency Management Department, as well as previous positions within FEMA, serving as leader of the agency's National Incident Management Assistant Teams and as a Federal Coordinating Officer. Ms. Criswell served 21 years in the Colorado Air National Guard and is the veteran of 2 overseas tours. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witness will please stand and raise her right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative. Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here today and look very forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witness that we have read your written statement and will appear in our full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statement to 5 minutes, but obviously you can speak whatever you need to say. We want to hear it. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, it will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes have expired, and we'll ask that you try to wrap it up at that point. I now recognize the Administrator for her opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding FEMA's efforts in response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. We value this committee's legislative support and oversight of our agency, and I look forward to our conversation today. On September 26th, Hurricane Helene made landfall in Florida as a powerful and a fast-moving Category 4 storm, with hurricane force winds extending 40 miles and tropical storm force winds extending 310 miles from its center. Helene then entered Georgia as a Category 2 hurricane before becoming a powerful tropical storm that continued to release historic rainfall over already saturated soils as it marched through South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. There were also impacts in West Virginia and Kentucky. Helene's powerful winds and floodwaters altered landscapes and devastated communities in many places not accustomed to experiencing such storms. The destruction caused by Helene was catastrophic. Less than 2 weeks later, Hurricane Milton rapidly intensified into a Category 5 storm in the Gulf of Mexico. After making landfall in Florida as a Category 3, it moved across the state into the Atlantic, spurring the formation of tornadoes and leaving an overlapping trail of destruction in many communities still reeling from Hurricane Helene. Many of these same communities were still recovering from Hurricanes Ian, Hurricanes Idalia, and Hurricane Debbie. And our hearts have been heavy with the stories of the survivors we have encountered and talked to. People who have lost their loved ones, their homes, and their businesses. These two catastrophic storms led to the loss of over 200 lives and caused extensive damages to homes and neighborhoods across the impacted states. There was also widespread disruption of critical services across southeastern United States, including the obstruction of transportation routes, which isolated many homes and communities. FEMA's mission statement is a simple one, spelled out in 7 powerful words: helping people before, during, and after disasters. And in my written testimony, I have provided a detailed account of FEMA's preparation, our pre-positioning of assets and personnel, and our coordination with other federal agencies in support of our state, our local, and our tribal partners. I have described in detail how FEMA responded to these 2 storms across 8 states, mobilizing the full weight of the federal government to help in impacted areas that were not accustomed to this kind of disaster, prioritizing search and rescue efforts, reopening roads to reconnect hard-to-reach areas, delivering essential food, water, and other supplies to residents, and restoring critical infrastructure. And I have described how FEMA is leading recovery efforts in these impacted states, doing everything we can to cut through red tape and expedite assistance to survivors. This has been a challenging time for our workforce of over 22,000 dedicated, hardworking people, many of whom were impacted by the storms themselves and delayed their personal and family recovery to meet our mission needs and respond to the disaster. Our workforce persevered through all of these challenges that I have just described. And they also persevered through a difficult security environment generated by misinformation about FEMA's work to spread through social media, which was spread through social media. Our goal is to help all people obtain all of the assistance that they need and that they are eligible for under the law. And any of the assistance and any misinformation that was out there was making this much more difficult for them to get this needed assistance. I greatly appreciate the voices and the support from Congress, from both sides of the aisle during this event, who attested to the work that FEMA was doing on the ground. So I was very concerned when I learned a FEMA employee had given instructions to a disaster survivor assistance team that were completely at odds with FEMA's mission. A critical function of these teams is to go door to door, to meet with disaster survivors, to make them aware of FEMA programs that are available for them, and to help them register for needed assistance. This employee wrote to about 11 staff members under her supervision that they should, quote, avoid homes advertising Trump, end quote. My senior leadership team provided me with this visual evidence that the employee had, in fact, issued these instructions, and they recommended that this employee be terminated, and I concurred and directed the termination of this employee. I released a statement that day, and I will repeat what I said to all of my employees and the American people. This type of behavior and action will not be tolerated at FEMA, and we will hold all people accountable if they violate our standards of conduct. I do not believe that this employee's actions are indicative of any widespread cultural problems at FEMA. FEMA, however, has taken appropriate action to ensure this matter is fully investigated, and I am committed to ensuring that nothing like this ever happens again. In the meantime, we have sent a new team to the field to contact all of the homes that had been skipped over at this employee's direction, and that work has been completed. Now, I know that this incident is on the minds of many members of this committee and across America, and I will be happy to answer your questions on it. However, I also hope that we will be able to have a chance to discuss the great work that our workforce has been doing in response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton, as well as the important challenges that lie ahead in the recovery effort. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify, Chairman. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now begin with questions, and the Chair recognizes first the member at ground zero of the last hurricane, Dr. Fox from North Carolina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to associate myself with your opening statement. Also, I want to thank the thousands of Americans who responded to the destruction of Helene in the North Carolina mountains by donating everything you can imagine to people there. Many tractor trailers of goods came from all over America. This response was wonderfully overwhelming. Unfortunately, our government agencies have not matched the care and compassion of average Americans. Ms. Criswell, I have the statement, the mission statement for FEMA here, because I looked at it and saw what you have said in terms of saying that the mission statement is to help people before, during, and after disasters in every form. But I think one of the biggest problems that I recognize while being on the ground for 6 weeks minimum, helping people, I was there. My area was very hard hit with the hurricane. But what I saw is constituents affected by the storm is how FEMA's representatives on the ground are telling people what the agency cannot do rather than what it can do. And you mentioned that you were bringing the entire weight of the federal government there, and I think that FEMA has fallen way short of that, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. Again, FEMA's entire mission is to assist, quote, before, during, and after disasters. It should not be up to disaster survivors to navigate the bureaucratic labyrinth in their time of need. FEMA appears to be plagued by poor decision-making and a serious lack of communication. Therefore, I think FEMA is not living up to its mission statement, a telling sign of mismanagement. And I want to say that I'm the kind of person who believes government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I tolerate no discrimination of any kind. There should be an information roadmap available to those affected by disasters, including what they can expect from FEMA. You started out by giving us figures about what happened and a description of what happened. We all know that. And in every meeting I've had with FEMA, either on the phone or in person, we get this litany of things that FEMA has done, how much money it's spent. But when you really get down to the nitty-gritty, you can't get any details. What that roadmap should include is how much, what kind of aid they can expect to receive, a timeline for aid, information on all available assistance, the total federal government, as you said, which we do not get. What types of decisions will have to be made in the coming weeks, months, and years. So does FEMA have this roadmap? And if so, how is it communicated to people on the ground?
Congresswoman Fox, I completely agree that our programs can be very complicated, and I have worked hard over the last 3.5 years to try to minimize the bureaucracy and make it easier for people to gain access to our programs.
So why are you unable to provide the basic information to those suffering from disasters in a timely fashion?
Congresswoman, we do have information that we give out to individuals that have been impacted by communities. We have several ways that they can reach out to us, but my direction has always been to try to meet people where they are, which is why we go into the communities and talk to people. We call them back if they've registered.
I was in a meeting with 20 homeowners who live really close to where I live the other day, and again, the first 30 minutes of the FEMA presentation was all bragging about what FEMA did. It is not providing basic information. If it's not doing that, how can it claim to be committed to helping people where they are?
I am happy to look at the information and the materials that were presented at your meeting and looking for ways to improve them. Our goal should be to try to tell people how we can help them instead of telling them what we can't do. And I've tried and worked to try to change that focus, or that the way we approach reaching out to people and finding ways to get to yes.
One of my colleagues recently asked FEMA where approximately 400 trailers full of supplies and aid were allegedly delivered in western North Carolina in the days after Hurricane Helene hit. He was told that the trailers were delivered to the state emergency management headquarters, but they also could not share where the aid, estimated to be worth between $4 and $10 million, was actually located. Is it correct that FEMA delivered aid to the state, then simply absolved itself from ensuring the aid actually reached the people it was intended to help?
This is a partnership. Our ability to respond to communities requires a deep collaboration between federal, state, and local partners. FEMA delivers supplies at the request of the state in the amount that they have requested, and the state prioritizes in consultation with their local jurisdictions on where those supplies need to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will have several questions to submit for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Frost from Florida.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So in my district, which was impacted by Hurricane Milton, I live in Orlando, Florida, been dealing with natural disasters and hurricanes my entire life. I've heard nothing but praise for FEMA's sense of urgency and how y'all have responded in the last many storms we've had. Since Hurricane Milton, many of my constituents have opened up casework with my office to help get FEMA assistance. My team and yours have worked hand in hand to solve these problems regardless of their political affiliation or their voting record. So just thank you for your hard work, and thank you to the hard work of all of the members of FEMA and staff who are fighting to ensure that people are safe and that we can recover after these horrible disasters. The individual responsible for the instruction that FEMA workers can avoid houses with Trump flags was fired. That's good. And thank you for handling that quite isolated situation. I do, though, however, have to call out the hypocrisy of many members of this committee. Madam Administrator, according to staff on President-elect Trump's former National Security Council, on at least 3 occasions, the president-elect hesitated to give disaster aid to areas he thought were too democratic, like California after the 2018 wildfires. If President Trump were to engage in partisan discrimination, how could that impact Americans, the economy, the environment, and also taxpayers in general?
The severe weather events that we have been experiencing and the increase in them, they don't discriminate. They impact all people across all walks of life in every part of this country. And we have seen a continued increase in the number of those events affecting more Americans. We have to maintain our ability to be a nonpartisan agency so we can ensure that everybody impacted by these events can get the resources and the help that they need, that they deserve, and that they're eligible for under the law.
According to reports, Trump only agreed to release aid when his staff pulled voting results to show him that the heavily damaged area of Orange County, California, had more Trump supporters than the entire state of Iowa. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a Politico article from October 2024 titled, "Trump Refused to Give California Wildfire Aid Until Told How Many People There Voted for Him," XAID says.
Without objection, so ordered.
In the FEMA chapter of Project 2025, the blueprint for the Trump administration, on the FEMA section, it said, quote, "They need to shift the majority of preparedness and response costs to states and localities instead of the federal government," end quote. This would be devastating for Floridians. We know these storms are happening more often because of the climate crisis. I've heard directly from scientists and meteorologists who fly into these storms after I flew into one with the hurricane hunters that they are going through more of these. They're seeing the worst storms they've ever seen in their careers. These are folks who've been doing this work since the 80s. Madam Administrator, how would this proposal impact the safety of folks like my constituents in Central Florida who are getting hit year after year with these once-in-a-100-year hurricanes?
The ability for these communities to rebuild after these events is extremely critical. Without them being able to rebuild, but also rebuild to a level that makes them more resilient against future events, is going to really impact their ability to recover. And so what I have seen through my time as a local emergency manager, as well as serving in this role, that the biggest limitation and the reason we have presidential declarations is when it exceeds the capacity of a jurisdiction to be able to rebuild and allow their community to recover, then it will only make it more vulnerable to future disasters.
After Hurricane Helene, President-elect Trump spread a ton of disinformation about FEMA assistance. Even like me, some of my Republican colleagues representing areas actually impacted from the storm, like Mr. Edwards from North Carolina, we've had to expend a significant amount of resources to fight these lies. During these hurricanes and the days leading up, I spent a lot of time in all the EOCs that are in my district. I spent time going to the shelters and speaking with people, and I can't tell you the amount of folks who came up to me in these shelters asking the most ridiculous questions based on what they heard from Donald Trump. And we know that in these emergencies, every second matters. Every minute matters in terms of life or death. Does FEMA have the tools and partnerships it needs to fully combat the disinformation we've seen from certain politicians?
We continue to see the amount of misinformation around all disasters increase month after month. And what we saw during Hurricane Helene was certainly at a scale that I had never seen before.
And how does this disinformation prevent y'all or affect y'all in being able to do the life-saving work that you do and impact the assistance delivery?
I think the biggest impact is that it makes individuals that have perhaps lost everything concerned about whether they should come to us for assistance, and then they cannot start their recovery process if they don't enter the system to get the resources that they're eligible for.
My hope is that over the next 4 years, President Trump won't do the same things again, which puts American lives at risk. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Donald from Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. Administrator Criswell, it's good to see you. My district was hit by Hurricane Ian 2 years ago. So we were devastated, like so many other communities were devastated by Helene and by Hurricane Milton. My question for you actually surrounds the firing of Miss Washington. She had given multiple interviews where she claimed that avoiding politically hostile homes is commonplace throughout FEMA. Is this a practice at FEMA?
Congressman, there is nothing in any of our policies, our training, or our information sent out to our field workers to avoid any home for whatever reason, especially not because of a political affiliation. The actions of this one individual are not representative of the work that we do at FEMA.
Now, Administrator, I got an issue because, and I will submit the article for the record, according to a New York Post article titled, "This is not isolated." There is a FEMA official who spoke under the condition of anonymity who says that the agency's practice of skipping Trump-supported houses or avoiding white or conservative-dominated disaster zones altogether is an open secret at the agency and has been going on for years. So, Ambassador, this is a statement given to the Post by an employee at FEMA. What is your response to that statement?
We have investigated this incident, and it is still under investigation. We are working with the Inspector General to determine whether or not this is broader than this. But the evidence that I have seen so far shows that this was an isolated incident and it has not gone beyond what this one employee did.
So, follow-up question to that. Has FEMA finished its investigation into this matter?
No, we have not finished our investigation. We have been working with the Office of the Inspector General. It was also referred to the Office of Special Counsel for a potential violation of the Hatch Act, and I have asked the Inspector General to do a full review of this incident.
So, Administrator Criswell, you told me at the beginning of this questioning that there is nothing in your policies that would dictate that this is to occur. Yet you have one official who was fired who said it does occur. You have another official under your purview, under the condition of anonymity, talking to the press that it does occur. But you can't verify to this committee that these practices do or do not occur. Is that correct?
I have been given no evidence and seen no indication that this goes beyond this one incident. If you have specific information, I would welcome that.
Are you prepared to turn over the communiques between your supervisors and their field representatives and upper-level management at FEMA to this committee?
We always cooperate with Congress on the information that they request, and we will continue to cooperate throughout this.
So you're prepared to turn over all those communications?
We are prepared to support requests for information to help support the ongoing investigation into this.
Chairman, I would move that it's clear that the administrator is more than prepared to share all communications with the Oversight Committee about various communications with field volunteers, volunteer staff on the ground, supervisors at FEMA headquarters here in Washington, D.C. Also, for the record, Chairman, I move that the article that I talked about, "This is not an isolated incident," be submitted for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Administrator, I want to follow up with one point. It was said later in this article, FEMA employees are trained to deal with threats in disasters. And I think it's important for the committee to understand that when you're on the ground dealing with threats, especially in a disaster area, it is important. Administrator, do you think it's a better course of action for law enforcement to be involved when potential threats occur on the ground? Because look, during Hurricane Ian, we understood that you not only had citizens who were trying to protect their homes from looters, and they are concerned. You have looters who are actively trying to get at people's property in a disaster zone. But apparently it appears that you have employees, whether you know or not, who are trying to take matters into their own hands. So wouldn't it be a better course of action to involve law enforcement who is on the ground in a prolific manner? And it's not just local law enforcement. I know from personal experience, it is other law enforcement agencies that are on the ground in support to neighboring communities. Would you agree with that?
Congressman, we have seen an increase in the amount of harassment during the response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. We have been closely coordinating with law enforcement in all of the states that have been impacted, in particular in North Carolina, where we had several reports of harassment and potential threats to our employees.
Okay, fair enough. What I would also let the committee know, as somebody who's had to deal with this firsthand, it's important for citizens to understand that it's very difficult to go through the FEMA protocols. We have had many amount of citizens who applied for direct assistance, were denied, and they had to work through my office to do that. I'm quite sure my colleagues who have had to deal with FEMA have dealt with this firsthand. I would really call on FEMA, whether it's this administration or the next, that they need to clean this process up, because the number one thing that hurts FEMA's reputation is the fact that so many citizens are denied when they apply the first time they come through the FEMA portal. And if they have to go through congressional offices to get help, and trust me, me and my colleagues, we will do everything for our citizens, but if that is going to be the protocol for how citizens get help from the Emergency Management Agency, then it needs to be completely revamped. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Criswell, thank you for your testimony. Can you explain what the role of a door-to-door canvass is by FEMA during a hurricane recovery?
These are our, Ranking Member, our disaster survivor assistance teams. These are groups of individuals that go out into communities to either see if they have registered for assistance, check on their case for them, or also identify if they have any other needs that we need to engage our nonprofit partners that might be in the area, like assistance with mucking and gutting their home. And we can relay that information back to the local emergency manager or back to the state to make sure we're meeting all of their needs.
And this is a situation where there may be a complete communications breakdown because of the hurricane itself, right?
That is part of the reason we do this, is because we know, and especially during these incidents, we saw limited cellular communication availability. They could not get online to register for assistance. They could not call us. And so we send people out to go knock on their door and see if they have had that opportunity yet.
How many doors would you have knocked on during Hurricanes Helene and Milton?
Tens of thousands. I would have to get you the exact number.
Okay, and hundreds of people would have been involved in the effort?
Yes.
Okay, so it's been reported that there were unprecedented levels of harassment and threats leveled against FEMA workers, both the full-time workers and then intermittent part-time workers and volunteers who came along. Do you have any sense of where this harassment and where these threats were coming from? What were the things being said that would lead people to attack FEMA workers?
We have seen over my last few years in this position, but even as my time as a local emergency manager, we have seen the amount of information being spread that's just inaccurate about FEMA programs, about FEMA policies continue to increase. We saw a big jump during Maui. We saw an even larger increase, and again, on a scale that I have not seen during Hurricanes Helene and Milton, primarily being spread through social media channels.
And have you undertaken any efforts to combat that disinformation?
So we do a number of things. We have an entire team of public affairs and external affairs experts that help us try to put positive information, correct information out. We establish a page. It's a standing practice for us to establish a rumor control page that we have done for many years through many administrations to put accurate information about the programs that FEMA is offering and the assistance that is available. We also reach out to the community. For example, in North Carolina right now, we're hiring community liaisons, people from the community that can help be a bridge between us and the people in their community to build that trust, make sure people are getting everything that they need, but also to let us know what kind of information or what kind of resources they may still need.
The employee who was fired by you a day or a day and a half after you learned of what had happened was an intermittent employee, a part-time employee who may or may not have been trained on the proper protocols of FEMA. But what do you tell your workers to do if, in fact, they are harassed or attacked at the doors, going door to door, offering people assistance?
Again, we have people that go into communities that have just been impacted by significant weather events and meeting people on their worst day. And people are, angry and they're upset because of what happened to them. And so we often have people that feel that they may be in an unsafe situation. And so we train them to be able to remove themselves from that situation reactively. We never have done anything to teach our employees to proactively avoid an area where they feel they might be threatened.
Okay, and just to restate the obvious, if this is correct, you have no policies or rules counseling people to engage in political party or candidate discrimination. Is that right?
No policy, no doctrine, no rule, anything to that matter.
Okay, and that's why you acted so swiftly to deal with that situation when it arose.
I learned of this on November 7th, that there was an alleged claim that an employee had done this. I directed my team to be able to look into it and provide me information. They showed me the evidence on November 9th, which is when I directed the termination of the employee.
And I understand that FEMA itself is investigating to get all of the facts of the matter. Do you also support an investigation by the Inspector General at FEMA?
I have already requested an investigation to the IG.
Okay. Well, look, on behalf of the family that stayed with me after the hurricane hit Asheville, North Carolina, and other friends who were affected, I want to thank FEMA for doing your very best on behalf of the American people and mobilizing a strong relief effort. Not perfect, none of them are, but certainly a very serious attempt to address all of the needs that arose. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Luna from Florida.
Administrator Criswell, nice to see you again. Up here, sorry. Yeah, thanks. You came to my district when we were impacted. Before I get to some questions that I have from my constituents, I did have a question in regards to the investigations that you have into Marnie Washington. So she went on CNN and she had stated that under the practice of avoidance and de-escalation, that was what she was using, what her supervisor was using in order to politically discriminate. My question for you, she also stated that her supervisor, Chad Hershey, had directed her not to help politically hostile Americans, aka anyone who, in their opinion, had Trump signs. My question for you is, were you aware of that, and has Chad Hershey been fired, or is he under investigation currently?
I understand that Mr. Hershey was in her supervisory chain, but that is part of now the ongoing investigation.
If you find that he directed her to, and I assume that you guys will be talking with her directly, but if you find that, are you committing that he's going to be fired?
I will commit that anybody who has taken actions to politically discriminate against people that were impacted by this disaster will have the appropriate disciplinary action, to include termination.
Okay, and then she also had stated on that same interview that this wasn't just isolated in Florida, but under that same de-escalation and avoidance guideline from your field manual that also happened in North Carolina and Georgia. Are you aware of this? And in your estimates, roughly how many people have been impacted? She also stated that there should be incidents reports in regards to FEMA, that we should request them, but I assume that you were looking into that. So if you can just follow up on that.
Yeah, we will certainly follow up on that. But again, our policies in nowhere talk about proactively discriminating against areas where they feel that there might be something harassing.
Tracking, sorry, I just have to move on because we have time here. My next question is that in regards to your investigation, Marnie Washington stated that after she was terminated that she still had access to her portals and the cases that she had filed. And because of that, she was actually able to see that FEMA was going through and deleting information in regards to the cases that she had specifically handled. Now, I understand that when people leave, sometimes things have to be terminated. But if you do have an ongoing investigation, my question is, why would you then want to delete information? Because then you wouldn't be able to adequately conduct a conclusive investigation.
I have no information that we have deleted anything, as stated by Ms. Washington. Even if something was deleted, it's all part of a permanent record, and we have access to it.
Okay, then I would advise, if you are tracking, that you should go, because she's saying that she physically saw that information was deleted out within 24 hours of her firing. I have one more question, but I'm going to get to some constituent questions, so please answer these quickly. In Pinellas County, where we were hit, we had actually 13 deaths during the first hurricane, but the county has currently had only one DRC and has requested a second DRC with no success. What is FEMA's process for approving additional DRCs when they're requested?
We work closely with the State Director of Emergency Management and the county to determine the best place for those. I can follow up with your staff on specifically why we haven't put a second one up.
Okay, and we are requesting additional help just because of the amount of claims that we have for that area, so we are going to be following up. Please assist with getting that additional. The second thing is, what is the status of FEMA's Flood Mitigation Assistance Program?
The NFIP program has seen a significant amount of claims as a result of Hurricanes Helene and Hurricane Milton. As you will see in the supplemental request, we are asking for debt relief for the National Flood Insurance Program so we can continue to pay on those claims. To date, I believe the number is somewhere over $800 million that we have paid out in response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton, but we will quickly run out of funding from that fund without the debt relief, and we'll have to go to the Treasury and ask for additional funding to pay those claims.
Okay, so if you get that funding, you guys will be able to essentially ensure that recovery and resiliency grants for all the counties impacted will be received. If you get the money,
for claims against the NFIP,
correct,
with the debt forgiveness, we can pay those claims.
Okay. My last question for you is in regards to community trends. Marnie Washington had alleged that that was what was put into a system that would mitigate these interactions if they felt that it was dangerous. In these communities, a lot of them were conservative and Trump supporters, that they felt that FEMA had created an environment that had stated that those people had made them feel uncomfortable, and that was the reasoning for them passing over these homes. What can you tell me about community trends in regards to this allegation that you made?
Our disaster survivor assistance teams, part of what they do is go out into the community to understand what the impacts are and to understand what the survivor needs are. This is often called community trends, but things that we are looking at are impacts to access, roads that are out, water infrastructure, needs of the community, like many places around South Carolina required oxygen bottles.
If I can just interrupt you real quick, how many people have been impacted by avoidance and de-escalation? Do you have a number for that just nationally, or is there a database for that?
I can tell you that for this particular incident at the direction of our employee, 20 homes were skipped.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your time. Chairman?
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Moskowitz from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. Administrator Criswell, good to be with you. As the only member in Congress who's run a disaster response, run a disaster recovery, handed out billions of dollars of FEMA money, also a Democrat who worked in a Republican administration and ran the recovery efforts for Hurricane Michael in deeply Republican areas of the Panhandle, I can tell you not once did I ever think about their politics or my politics. As I toured the Panhandle in Neil Dunn's district or Matt Gaetz's district, I looked at people as Americans who were hit by a disaster. And my job was to get them every program that FEMA had, every dollar available to them. That was my job. What happened in Florida in this instance is deeply disturbing. It's unacceptable. I know you know that. Disaster aid should never be declined based on support of any political candidate. And I'm happy this rogue employee was fired. You did the right thing immediately, right? What should have happened here is if there were members of FEMA's team that felt uncomfortable, that should have been passed up to the FCO. That should have gone to the federal coordinating officer. And then that information should have gone to Director Guthrie, who's the Director of Emergency Management in the state of Florida, my former deputy. And then they could have made sure to identify those homes and gotten them the information. But that's not what happened. There was a clear breakdown here. And so you should do an investigation to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Every emergency manager in the country during COVID, yourself included, I'm sure, was worried about the politics of disaster aid changing. We saw it happening in real time. And we were really worried, about how that would go into future disasters. As the world is becoming more partisan, the world is becoming more divided. You're seeing it here in the country. We were hoping that there'd be a force field around FEMA. But that's not the case. I know the people at FEMA are exhausted, okay? Talent is retiring. They have a rotating door because of the burnout rate from disasters. That's not just in this administration. I talked to the previous two administrators during Donald Trump's administration, and it was the same problem because of all the disasters that are happening and the burnout rate that exists. My own agency lost 200 people after COVID because they were burned out. Every problem that my colleagues brought up, and they're right. Chairwoman Fox is right. Anna Paulina Luna is right. All of the problems that they brought up with FEMA, those issues about programs and being denied, this is not new. This has been going on for a while. It happened in the Trump administration, right? Because here's one of the things that I'm going to say that no FEMA administrator will tell you while they're FEMA administrator. But the last two Trump administrators will tell you, previous administrators will tell you when they leave the job, is that Homeland has become too big. It has become too big. I got to work with Joe Lieberman. The idea of Homeland was a great idea. It's still a good idea. But never did anyone envision that the bureaucracy would become too big. FEMA can't make the changes you want them to make, whether it's Ms. Criswell or the next administrator that Trump appoints. They can't. Homeland won't let them because there's 30 people around a table, right, trying to figure out what to do in the agency. So for the people at DOJ, if Vivek and Elon are listening, you need to look at Homeland. You got problems at Secret Service, guess where that is? Homeland. And so what I'm saying is that don't look at Administrator Criswell or this FEMA administration or in this Biden administration. If you think there are issues in FEMA that you want to fix, I'm letting you know these issues go back decades. They're not new. They're not. And so I do want to say one more thing because I think it's tremendously important for my colleagues across the aisle and my Democratic colleagues. It is so important that we don't allow FEMA to become politicized and that we don't allow disaster aid to become politicized. Laser beams do not start fires in California. We cannot guide where hurricanes go. And you know what? You know who's amplifying that stuff? Foreign accounts. Other countries are amplifying that stuff on social media to divide us, to divide Democrats and Republicans. They want us fighting over disaster aid because it helps their goal. We can't participate in that. We shouldn't amplify that. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for having this hearing. We should have this hearing. But I want you to know that these issues that you're bringing up are not issues of today. These are issues of yesteryear. And so I will work with anyone across the aisle on fixing these issues within Homeland. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Criswell, is Ms. Washington lying to us?
Ms. Washington has...
She said it's common practice. You said it's reprehensible and isolated. Both statements can't be true. So someone's not giving us the facts, and I'm kind of trying to figure out who's not telling the truth.
The actions that Ms. Washington took were unacceptable.
Well, you had another employee. Now, they remain anonymous, but I think one of my colleagues pointed this out earlier. A FEMA official who spoke on condition of anonymity said Ms. Washington likely received, quote, very clear guidance from her supervisors. Is that person lying too?
I have not received any evidence outside of the screenshot that Ms. Washington directed.
So those
her
two
team.
people are wrong. They're not telling the truth to us.
We are currently investigating this
But that's
issue
not what
and
you said.
bringing
You
in
said
the
this is
IG.
isolated, reprehensible, hasn't happened. This is the only time. And they're saying, nope, 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 it's commonplace.
I am saying that FEMA's mission is to help all people.
Well, let's look at
before,
maybe
during,
the
and
best
after
evidence we
disaster.
have is the actual screenshot. Can you put the screenshot up on the screen? Let's look at what the text message said. The text message said, implement best practices. Like, this is the best practices. We're going to implement them. And they talk about making sure you're going in pairs or with more than one person, avoid the Trump homes, drink your water, take your towel, coconut waters. So stay hydrated, walk with someone else, and don't go to the Trump homes. It seems pretty common and matter of fact in the actual evidence we do have, the text message itself. But you're still saying Ms. Washington and this other person aren't telling the truth.
When I received this text message, it was not in accordance with the way we conduct business at FEMA, and I directed
Even though it said
termination.
best practices, even though it said stay hydrated, which everyone would agree with, even though it said go in pairs, which everyone would agree with, even though it said bring a towel, make sure you're covered. I mean, it said coconut water is the best way to stay, even though it said all those practical things, the part about avoiding the Trump homes, that's not a best practice, that's not commonplace. Is that what you're saying?
That is nowhere in our policy, and I can't speak to
I'm not saying it's in your
motivations
policy.
behind what Ms. Washington did.
But it was, okay, now her supervisor, this Mr. Hershey, have you talked to him and to find out if he knew this was happening?
I understand that he was in her chain of command, and this is under investigation.
Have you talked to there's 13 people on this text message. Have you talked to all 13 of those individuals?
This incident is under investigation.
That's not what I asked you. I know it's under investigation, and we know how investigations work when it's done inside the agency. It takes forever. I'm asking, did you talk to the 13 people on this best practices text message?
The Office of Professional Responsibility has taken this, and they are following appropriate protocol to investigate.
Is the Inspector General looking at it as well?
And I have asked the Inspector General to take a look at this.
Any idea when they're going to talk to these 13 people since you have it? Have you talked to, how about you personally? Have you talked to any of these 13 people?
I have not talked to them.
You have not talked to any
I
of them?
have an entire team that focuses on this investigation, and that's what they're doing.
Seems to me it's part of a mindset that's in government. And this is the scary part, because I think it's broader. And you don't have to take my word. Take it what people have said. I mean, this reminds me, we've talked about this many times, but I can think of, well, actually the same person, let's go back to that, the same person who said that this likely received very clear guidance, this other FEMA official, also said this: I've heard from other entities who are serving in North Carolina that there was clear guidance to be mindful, quote, of the types of people who are in Western North Carolina. That's pretty derogatory stuff there, isn't it?
I have not seen any.
But you know what it sounds like? It sounds like Peter Strzok. Peter Strzok, when he said, oh, I just went into Walmart I can smell the Trump supporters. Sounds like Joe Biden when he said, oh, the garbage I see is the Trump supporters out there. Sounds like the guys the Democrats had, the professor the Democrats had testify back in 2019 in the impeachment. Conservatives, especially very conservative people, tend to spread out, perhaps because they don't even want to be around themselves. This disdain, this mindset that's in the government where everyone's deplorable, everyone's garbage, everyone is, smelly people at Walmart, and oh, be mindful of those people in Western North Carolina. That's what it sounds like. And again, the best evidence is the text message we have, which reinforces that mindset that we have seen from so many people in our government.
The actions directed by Ms. Washington are unacceptable. And when I received this text message, I directed her termination.
Do you have any idea who this other, who this other official is?
I do not, and if you have that information, Congressman, please share it.
I don't have it. You're the one who's got it. You're the one who hasn't talked to the 13 people on the text message.
It has not been raised to me.
All right. I think, Chairman, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Administrator Criswell, I understand that in the weeks since Hurricanes Milton and Helene, FEMA has provided more than $1.6 billion in assistance to more than 910,000 households. FEMA has also delivered more than 16 million meals, 18 million liters of water, more than 3,000 rolls of blue roof sheeting, and more than 700,000 gallons of fuel to the communities devastated by these hurricanes. And 700 and 500 FEMA employees remain deployed in these communities to assist with recovery. Administrator, what steps did FEMA staff take to contact their with survivors on the ground, including those displaced from their homes, and make them aware of the resources available to them?
Congresswoman, FEMA has many ways that we can reach and connect with people that have been impacted by disasters. They can contact us through our 1-800 number. They can go through our disasterassistance.gov website to register for assistance. They can use the FEMA app. We also have teams that go out into the communities, especially in something like North Carolina where communications were limited, to make sure that they've had the opportunity to register for assistance or to check on their case to see what other information might be needed for them to finish it up and to process it. And then we establish disaster recovery centers, fixed facilities once the infrastructure supports it, so people have a place they can go and they can talk to somebody face to face and work through their particular needs and their particular case, because we know everybody's situation is going to be unique to them. And we want to make sure all of our programs are available and we help them find the right ones to support their unique needs.
Thank you. The destruction of Hurricane Helene left close to 4 million people without power. Administrator, how did FEMA workers reach affected residents for support in this disaster response effort, even if a certain region lost connectivity or if a survivor lacked access to internet?
One of the first things we do, Congresswoman, is we put part of our leadership team in with local emergency managers to work side by side with them to understand which parts of their community still need assistance. Then we can either direct our disaster survivor assistance teams to go into those areas, or also the state is sending their resources, like the National Guard. The National Guard in North Carolina did an amazing job of getting into the communities and helping people that have been impacted. This is a holistic effort. This takes all of us to be able to reach all of those impacted, especially in something that has been widespread and complicated as the destruction that we saw in North Carolina.
I also want to recognize that because of challenges like these, it did take too long for emergency assistance to come in such communities. We must learn the lessons of those shortcomings to improve the reach of emergency services at the local, state, and federal level. Earlier this year, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration projected a, quote, above normal, end quote, hurricane season, meaning the level and intensity of storms and hurricanes would increase over this period. 11 storms have developed into hurricanes this year. More than a few years later, Luhana community is still being built back after wildfires hit the land of Maui. And recovery operations are still continuing more than 2 years after Hurricane Ian made landfall in Florida. Administrator Criswell, what can Congress do to make it easier for FEMA to support long-term recovery efforts and assist with future disasters that strike the United States?
Congressman, we have 2 pieces of bipartisan legislation that would be very beneficial to our ability to help communities: the Disaster Survivor Fairness Act and the Management Cost Modernization Act. And I understand that I'm over the time, but I'd be happy to talk more about those 2 pieces. They would be critical in changing the way we help survivors.
I commend you and FEMA's thousands of staff from across the country who left their homes to deploy to communities in need and provide them with assistance in the face of destruction, trauma, and loss. And I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Gosar from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just like last night, the White House requested an additional $98.6 billion for disaster relief, with $40 billion marked for FEMA. Although it was created to provide relief from disasters, FEMA has now become the Biden-Harris administration's star student in political persecution. In October, FEMA intentionally violated the civil rights of American citizens in response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. This is a key example of the weaponization of the federal government against the American people. And I suspect there is more for this committee to uncover. It is critical that Congress is empowered to conduct rigorous oversight before any emergency funding that has been placed into FEMA's hands. Ms. Criswell, according to your testimony, FEMA led the interagency response to Hurricane Helene and Milton for up to 64 different agencies. Do you think FEMA has the authority to direct these other agencies to also avoid homes with Trump signs?
There is nothing in FEMA's policy that would ever direct anybody to avoid anybody, regardless of political affiliation or way of life. Our mission is to help all people before, during, and after disasters.
Gotcha. Former FEMA employee Marnie Washington told reporters this discrimination was a colossal event and occurred in Florida, North Carolina, and South Carolina. You testified earlier today at T&I committee that this was an isolated incident and that no other supervisor or employee deployed with Marnie Washington provided the guidance to avoid homes advertising Trump signs. Will you commit to also requesting an IG report for the discrimination in North Carolina and South Carolina?
I have already requested the Inspector General to investigate this, but I will be certain to ensure that they include North Carolina and South Carolina in that.
Thank you. An anonymous female employee, we've been told, I guess it would be from the Daily Signal, that employees were also advised to avoid certain homes and specifically use the terms hick, cowboy, redneck, Trump supporters, and MAGA to describe them. Have you come across any of these terms in your investigation so far?
This is the first I am ever hearing any of those terms.
I'll make sure you have those. In an interview with the Washington Examiner, they said these homes were avoided because based on community trends from hostile political encounters. My question to you is, how does FEMA declare an incident as a community trend? Is it true that it only takes one encounter to make a FEMA employee uncomfortable to declare a community trend?
One of the things that these teams do, our disaster survivor assistance teams, is they go into the communities to not only register people for assistance, but to understand the impacts of the community. They're looking for things like damages and access issues to transportation infrastructure. They're looking for damages to water and power. They're also trying to understand the survivor needs. These are often referred to as community trends, but these are used to help us understand the impacts and what resources we're going to need to bring in. These are not proactive efforts to try to identify where we should or should not go.
Okay, so my office requested these incident reports ahead of this hearing, but were not provided. Can you please provide this committee with the incident reports that determine Lake Placid should be defined as a community trend?
I wouldn't say that Lake Placid was defined as a community trend. Again, when we talk about impacts to a community, we're looking at impacts to that community and survivor needs.
So you would provide all the incident reports? So
We will work with Congress on the request for information and provide what you need.
Now, Ms. Criswell, in October you said fighting misinformation is a priority for FEMA, including that you allege misinformation from President Trump, Elon Musk, and some of my colleagues about FEMA's responsibility or lack thereof in its spending. Is FEMA spending its taxpayer funds responsibly? Quick question.
Can you repeat that, sir?
Yes, is FEMA spending its taxpayer funds responsibly?
We are absolutely spending our taxpayer dollars responsibly and supporting an unbelievable increase in the number of severe weather events that have been happening across the United States.
Yes. Are you aware of the OIG's report from 2320 from March of 2023 titled, FEMA should increase oversight to prevent misuse of humanitarian relief funds, and or a second September 2022 OIG report titled, FEMA did not implement controls to prevent more than $3.7 billion in improper payments from the Lost Wages Assistance Program?
I'm aware of those reports.
And you knew this, and then how are you applying that to this discovery now that you're hearing about Ms. Washington and possibly other people causing a problem for this?
We value our partnership with the Inspector General, and we appreciate the findings that they give us and our areas that we can continue to improve. Some of those reports and some of the findings in those we non-concurred with. But for those that we did, we continue to work with them so we can continue to improve, because we are not a perfect agency, and we always look to improve the way we help people.
I don't think anybody's perfect, so thank you. Appreciate it.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Administrator Criswell. As evidenced recently by Hurricane Helene and Milton and the catastrophic consequences, we continue to witness historic flooding that is triggered by extreme weather events. In our own state of Massachusetts, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has already predicted that my area, the Boston area, is expected to endure between 12 and 19 days of high tide flooding that we've never experienced before. That's the most in the Northeast region. The Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service also reports that floods are the most common and costliest natural disasters across the United States. However, flood damage is not covered typically by traditional homeowner insurance, and moreover, most private insurers don't even offer flood coverage. Instead, as you know, most of our constituents procure flood insurance for their homes and businesses from the National Flood Insurance Program, which you administer. It's a federal government program that provides more than $1.3 trillion in insurance coverage and 4.7 million policies to residents, mostly in flood zones, in over 22,000 communities nationwide. Unfortunately, Madam Administrator, to the detriment of both victims of flood damage and the American taxpayer, this program is currently more than $20 billion in debt, especially after having to borrow substantial funds from Treasury, as you noted earlier, to cover a series of devastating flood seasons, including going back to 2017, which became the costliest season on record and included Hurricanes Maria, Harvey, and Irma. Administrator, FEMA administers the National Flood Insurance Program, which is set to expire in a few weeks of this year. Can you offer us your thoughts on how the financial position of this program is impacting your ability to support homeowners and businesses that are recovering from flood damage?
The National Flood Insurance Program is one of the only ways that a homeowner can get the necessary coverage to protect their investments. And the National Flood Insurance Program has not had a multi-year authorization in many years. It has been from CR to CR.
Right.
Without a multi-year authorization, we will continue to struggle year after year to meet the claims that individual homeowners have. And we have offered up with our reauthorization proposal 13 measures, I think it's 13, steps that we can take that will be able to make the program financially solvent and make sure that everybody has access to this through an affordability framework as well. As we know, not everybody can afford flood insurance, yet it's their number one resource and tool to help protect their investment.
So we seem to keep falling behind with these 1 year, I think it's called as-needed funding. You don't have a multi-year program where you can actually try to get ahead of some of this stuff. So we're still dealing with Hawaii. We're still dealing with some of these 2017 disasters that we haven't caught up to. One thing I wanted to ask you is that, you know, we seem to compartmentalize these disasters. We have, you know, we've got, because of the impacts of climate change, we've got, you know, these epic rainfall events that's causing flooding. We've got tornadoes, we've got hurricanes, we've got drought-induced wildfires, and our flood insurance program only covers certain people or targets certain people in flood zones. Would it be better, would it be more efficient if we looked at rather than having a flood insurance program, we had a broader disaster insurance program where we have more people paying into that? It might cross-subsidize some of the costs that we're seeing as a result of these disasters, and might allow a break to the taxpayer instead of having to go in and bail out people who might repeatedly be experiencing you know, flood damage from storm surges in areas where they may not wisely relocate.
Yeah, I mean, the National Flood Insurance Program is available to anybody. And I often have said, if it rains where you live, it can flood where you live. There are only certain areas that are mandated to purchase flood insurance, but everybody has the opportunity to purchase flood insurance. As far as making that a broader, more catastrophic insurance program, I think that's something that we should be having conversations with the private sector about, because that's what they should be providing.
All right. Thank you. Time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Very good question. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Administrator, I want to thank you for the work that you and FEMA did in my district a few years ago after the tornadoes in West Kentucky. I want to publicly say that. With respect to the text message behind me, how did you receive the text message? Did you know about it before it became public, or was it brought to your attention before the media made public with it?
It was brought to my attention on November 7th while I was in North Carolina with my leadership team checking in on recovery. It was mentioned to me that they had heard that there was a text message that a staff member had sent. I then directed my team to look into this. This was before the media inquiry or the media story came out. They reviewed it and looked into it on the 8th. They contacted me on November 9th. They showed me the text message. I still had not seen any media stories, and I directed the termination of the employee because it violates the way we conduct business.
And you've testified that you believe this was an isolated incident. Why should we believe that this is an isolated incident and not part of a pattern in FEMA? Because we've seen many other government agencies that we believe have become politicized and or weaponized. So, I mean, why should we believe this is an isolated incident?
Chairman, I understand your concern, and I share your concern, because I want to ensure that the American people know that FEMA is there to support all people, which is why we are conducting an investigation and why we have asked the IG to look into this further to ensure that this is not beyond the one employee who sent this message. It is not indicative of the rest of our workforce, and it is completely unacceptable.
So, I want to go back to Ms. Washington. You terminated her. She was a part-time employee. If she were a full-time FEMA employee, could you have terminated her then and there on the spot?
We definitely have more flexibility within our intermittent employee HR practices, but we would have been able to take the necessary action to remove her until a full investigation had been done.
So how likely would it have been that her termination would have been overturned because she would have been a full-time civil servant and been protected by the civil servant merit laws, tenure laws, whatever you want to call it?
Given the text of this message, it's very clear that this was an unacceptable type of behavior, and I don't believe it would have been overturned. I think the system worked.
Well, we're going to find out with a lot of federal employees that we believe should be held accountable for bad behavior. And that's one of the huge issues in this election, and this is going to be a priority for the new administration, and this is a role that this committee is going to play moving forward to try to work with the Trump administration, work with Elon Musk and Mr. M. Swamy to try to make government more efficient. So we'll see. We certainly believe that people, regardless of their party, regardless of their status in their years of service in the federal government, regardless of their ideology, if they've done wrong, then they should be held accountable. And I think the American people agree with us, and I think that was a huge issue in the election a few weeks ago. I want to switch gears and talk about FEMA, and I think a lot of people, myself included, often wonder what is the role of FEMA. So if a hurricane or a tornado or a natural disaster happens, I believe FEMA should be first on the scene. I believe that they, should be in charge of obviously rescue and recovery to ensure that to help coordinate to ensure that people have food and shelter, and then of course the big role I believe FEMA plays is debris removal to try to help coordinate to get the power going, to get the roads cleared and things like that. A lot of people wonder, what else is FEMA responsible for? Because I know when we had our issues in West Kentucky, people were thinking that if they didn't have insurance, that FEMA was supposed to come in and pay for that. Can you tell this committee and the American people who are watching this what exactly FEMA's role is the second a natural disaster happens, whether it's a wildfire out west or whether it's a tornado in the Midwest or whether it's a hurricane on the East Coast? What is FEMA's responsibility from start to finish, and how long should that take?
I think the best way to start that, Chairman, is the fact that all disasters are executed at the local level, they are managed at the state level and supported by the federal government, and that's where FEMA comes in. In this particular incident, I contacted governors before the storm made landfall in all of the states that were impacted, encouraging them to ask for a pre-landfall emergency declaration. What that does is it allows me to pre-position resources. And these aren't just FEMA teams, these are the federal government. It gives me the ability to direct other members of the federal government to come in and be able to respond to those immediate life-saving needs as needed after a storm passes. For these events, we pre-positioned resources from Florida up to North Carolina and into Virginia to support those immediate needs. And we do that at the support of the governor. We have teams that are embedded with the governor sitting side by side who are also communicating with the local emergency managers, the local first responders to know where those needs are so we can direct our resources to the areas that don't have enough. These all start and end with that local first responder, and they did amazing work in those first few hours after these storms passed, and our teams on the ground immediately, the search and rescue teams from across the federal government, were there doing life-saving activities as the storm were passing all of these states. We then support through mission assigning other federal agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers to help assess what the needs are going to be for debris removal, or at the request of a local jurisdiction to actually do the debris removal if they don't have the contracts to do so. And then we continue to support the stabilization of those lifelines, being able to reimburse communities if they put in a temporary bridge or if they've done something to, in the case of Asheville.
And the time's expired, but what's the normal time length for this? What do you have an objective when you go in and say, all right, this is when we hope to be finished? Do we hope everybody's paid? And do you have, is that ever a factor or an objective?
All disasters are definitely unique. My objectives and my timelines are in that response to make sure that I have teams on the ground before landfall, that they are engaged during and after landfall, and then when the governor's team tell us that incidents stabilize, then we demobilize those response teams.
Chair recognizes.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a UC request on some relevant articles. One published in The Hill, September 30, 2024, titled "Georgia Governor Kemp Praises Biden's Hurricane Helene Response Amid Trump Criticism." A CNN article, October 7, titled "DeSantis and Biden Speak on Storm Recovery After Reports GOP Governor Had Not Returned Calls from President and Vice President." And 3, a CNN article, October 3rd, titled "Fact Check Amid Bipartisan Praise for Biden's Hurricane Response, Trump Falsely Claims Reviews Are Universally Negative."
Without objection to order. Chair recognizes Mr. Christian Morte from Illinois.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Administrator, for your service. I want to show you a visual. Do you recognize this picture?
I do not.
Good. It's an atmospheric research facility in Alaska that, believe it or not, conspiracy theorists allege is a mind-controlling weather machine. And one of the conspiracy theories out there is that somehow FEMA controls the weather. And I assume that you, as the administrator, do not control the weather, right?
I do not control the weather.
And you don't use secret machines to control hurricanes to target certain places in the United States, right?
Correct.
And you and your team did not direct severe weather at North Carolina to, quote unquote, commandeer lithium mine property in that state, right?
Why would anybody want to bring harm to the American people?
And you would not direct severe weather to target anyone of a particular political party, right?
Never.
You're not establishing FEMA camps to detain individuals or enact martial law, right?
Correct.
These are all conspiracy theories that you've had to deal with. I'm glad that you have addressed them in this forum. Now let me talk about stuff that's true. It's true that during Hurricane Helene and Milton, FEMA assisted more than 35,000 households with disaster relief, right?
That number sounds about correct.
Let me just talk to you a little bit about what certain Republican officials have said about your response. Can you please show the first one? This is Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia. You recognize him?
I do.
He said, "I'm incredibly appreciative of the rapid response and the cooperation from the federal team at FEMA." You don't disagree with that, right?
Governor Youngkin and I were communicating, texting, and talking daily, if not hourly, during the initial hours that it was passing Virginia.
Well, let me show you another quote. This is Governor Henry McMaster of South Carolina. He said, "Federal assistance from FEMA has, quote, been superb." You don't disagree with that either, right?
I do not.
Another one. This one is from Senator Tom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina. He said, "It has to be a coordinated response, and FEMA knows how to do this well." I presume you don't disagree with him either, right?
I do not.
Let me turn to a final topic, and this has to do with basically homes that also serve as child care centers in many places, including in disaster zones. Administrator Criswell, access to child care is often forgotten in the aftermath of a disaster, and I'm worried that cases like these don't get enough attention by FEMA or other agencies because these child care centers are often based in the provider's homes rather than a commercial facility. Let me show you what's called a flood susceptibility map of the Chicago area, which is what I represent. I'd like to draw your attention to this particular map because it shows the areas of the Chicago, what we call Chicagoland, that have high susceptibility of flooding. And as you can see, it's this blue area which basically covers the entire region like a wet blanket. It represents millions of parents and children, as well as thousands of child care centers. And so my question to you is, in light of the fact that there's a perception, and I believe a reality, that not enough attention has been paid to these child care centers that are situated in homes, can you commit to proposing to my office and this committee ways that you can increase coordination between FEMA and the SBA to assist businesses like these home-based child care centers?
Congressman, my office would be happy to provide any technical drafting assistance or further assistance to be able to figure out how we can better address these vulnerable populations within these communities.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Grofman from Wisconsin.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on over here. I think the last time we had FEMA before this committee was maybe about 8 years ago, and that was a time when I think down in Louisiana they had mobile homes that were being sold for, I don't know if you remember this, for maybe a tenth the cost to which they were paid for, but that was the last time. I can tell you, along with many Republicans, when they come into contact with the government, they sometimes worry about prejudice against them. Okay, I know one guy in my district, he once did an ad, and miraculously, not your agency, another agency kind of came down hard on him. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. We all felt it was not coincidence. Under President Biden, foreign aid's become a vehicle to promote an overseas social agenda pushed by one party. The administration's implemented a disturbing trend of using foreign assistance as a tool to advance political and ideological goals. This raises an important question. Is the same political discrimination influencing how FEMA allocates disaster relief domestically, how it responds to this crisis? First of all, FEMA's workforce is unionized and represented by the American Federation of Government Employees. Is that true?
Yes, our employees have that option.
Okay. What percentage of FEMA employees are part of the union, do you know?
I don't have that number on me, but I'll be happy to get back to you.
Okay. Does FEMA collect or track data on political contributions made
We
by...
do not.
Okay. The union representing your employees, at least what I have before me here today, has contributed about $12 million to Democrats over the last 20 years. Last 3 cycles, 93% to Democrats, 96% to Democrats, again, 96% to Democrats. And these contributions go where you'd expect: Senate Majority PAC, DCCC, and President Biden himself. It raises a question. When you have a group of employees or somebody representing employees that is so overwhelmingly slanted to helping one party as opposed to the other party, is it possible that that overwhelming bias slips into some decisions that are being made by your employees?
Unions are not part of our FEMA control, and employees have the option to choose to join them or not.
Right. I mean, the people who run the unions, though, and who are presumably elected by your employees, want to push contributions overwhelmingly to one group. I assume they communicate with your employees. Is this something that possibly concerns you, or is this why we're perhaps here today and that a couple of your employees seem to believe their responsibility was to use their government job to help one group of people rather than the other group of people? Could it perhaps create that mindset?
Congressman, it is just unacceptable that any FEMA employee would tell any part of our organization to not support an individual that was impacted by a disaster because of a political yard sign.
Right. I'm just saying, you see what I'm saying? But, you know, it'd be one thing if it's 50-50. But when it's like 95% to one party, 96% to one party, does that create an environment perhaps of a dislike or even hatred of the political party that they're not giving money to? Because, of course, as union, they presumably communicate with their employees. This is who you should be supporting, blah, 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 blah. I sometimes wonder if that atmosphere comes a little bit from these one-sided, slanted unions.
Again, employees have a choice of whether or not they want to join a union or not. Not all of our employees are part of that union. And regardless, it is unacceptable, regardless if you are in a union or not, to discriminate against a disaster survivor because of a political sign in their yard. That's not who we are.
I'm really glad that Chairman Comer is having this committee. Are you aware of anything you're doing to make sure this sort of thing does not happen in the past or in the future, given the overwhelming political slant of the union that represents your employees?
So you're talking about anything I've done with the union or this event?
Specifically to make sure this is not going to happen again.
Yep.
Specifically talking to your employees and say, we realize you have a union that apparently really dislikes Republicans.
Yep.
What are you doing to make sure that that doesn't flop over into how they dole out the government largesse?
Yeah, so immediately upon the termination of the employee that made this direction, I sent out an email to the workforce letting them know what is expected of them and that we serve all people. I have been in this job for 3.5 years, and my focus has always been on putting people first, and that's all people. We have also conducted refresher training for all of our staff that are in the field, explaining to them what we expect of them again, so there's no misinterpretation of how we support people that have been impacted from disasters. And we will continue to work at the IG on the investigation on if there's any other factors related to this particular incident.
Thank you. I'm sure this is something that they'll be talking about for the next 15 years.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Mfume from Maryland.
Thank you, Chairman Comer and Ranking Member Raskin. I want to thank the Administrator for being here today. And I want to associate my remarks with those of the Ranking Member, Mr. Raskin, in his opening statement. Madam Administrator, you've got a tough job. And I've tried to sit here and to listen to what you say and how you say it. And my gut tells me that you are a good person with a good heart who wants to do good things for your nation. I think that if there is a disconnect here, it might be the fact that you can't make everybody underneath you good people, even though we'd like for them to be that way, because we take pride in our federal workforce, the fact that it is not a political workforce. Every now and then, there becomes a possibility where something terrible can happen. And we all know that 2024 has been a trying year for various agencies throughout the government dedicated like yours to protecting and providing for Americans of all walks of life. Your agency has done a good job in providing resources, at least what you have, I might add that, in very difficult situations in a number of different communities. That conclusion is not mine alone. It comes from governors, other members of Congress, mayors across the nation. That being said, I would be remiss if I did not, in a deliberately redundant way, go back and address this report of a FEMA employee who were allegedly foregoing visits to homes that had Trump signs displayed. Now, regardless of whether that employee was following a FEMA policy or not, it's a sad day, quite frankly, anytime. We've realized we've reached such a state in our government where people are making decisions based on their own partisan beliefs when they're in a nonpartisan role of providing service and providing it to everybody. And I must say that every disaster is not even a natural disaster. In my own city of Baltimore, we had a major bridge collapse, the Francis Scott Key Bridge. And we're still struggling to try to find a way to deal with that. And that's been since March 26 when it collapsed. The Port of Baltimore was forced to close, as you know. Longshoremen and longshorewomen were let go without work. Small businesses were impacted. We mourned the lives of those 6 persons who died on that bridge that night. And as we do in every disaster, we did not check to see which political party they favored. When the Small Business Administration, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Coast Guard all stepped up, as they did repeatedly month after month, to do the tough work, nobody asked for a party registration or a voting card or a voting record. So we know that incidents like that are going to happen again. But what we, I think, have to be very firm in is our belief that emergencies should never have a party and that disasters ought never be partisan. I expect that we're going to work together on this. I would strongly suggest, though, that as I listen to the interview that journalist Roland Martin did with the person in question, I'm still scratching my head trying to figure out if, in fact, she was told by someone who is full-time, who may have taken an overreach in a disaster with a lot going on, to say, by the way, you can skip those homes. I don't know that she necessarily would have done it on her own. As you know from the interview, she's not a Democrat, she's not a registered Republican, and she did not even vote. So I'm still hoping that at some point in time your request to the Inspector General will be taken seriously, and he will start to look at what's going on. We need facts in this committee more than anything else. And I'm going back to the comments of my colleague from Florida who mentioned the overall Department of Homeland Security and suggested that that is where the problem lies, because it's so massive and people are not doing what they ought to do when they ought to do it to ensure integrity. I'm going to meet with him later today on the floor because I want to know that. He's worked in that capacity, so he should know what he's talking about. So I would just hope that as we move forward here, to the extent that you can provide this committee and all the members of this committee with additional details, that would be helpful. I'd like very much to know what the IG's response to you is going to be. And I'd like to know at the conclusion of your own report, if you would be so kind as to share that with the chair and the ranking members so that members of this committee who are still really not knowing what to believe will have something more concrete that we can look at and make decisions on. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Cloud from Texas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Administrator, for being here. The Chair had asked how long does it take to recover from these, and I represent a district that was devastated by Harvey. It was just a few months ago that we were still at a press conference at a ribbon cutting for something, a project that we had worked with FEMA to help bring recovery to. So obviously our hearts and minds go out to all those devastated in these past two hurricanes and what those communities and the families are going through right now. I wanted to ask you about Representative Donalds mentioned that Ms. Washington says that she thinks this isn't an isolated incident. Of course, we have the New York Post article that talks about a FEMA official who went on and said that avoiding white or conservative-dominated disaster areas was an open secret within the agency. You state that there's nothing in the policy that, you know, and I will say I've been in enough of these, and that's the expected answer from any administrator. Of course, it's not in the policy. It's from our standpoint, it's not the policy that we're concerned with. It's not in the policy for the IRS to target conservatives. It's not in the policy for NIH to fund gain-of-function research. It's not in DHS policy for them to release foreign terrorists into our land, but they are. It's not policy of the FBI to target school teachers or people of faith, but all this is happening. And the common response is, well, it's not in the policy manual. Well, we're concerned about the culture. And I do not think that it's in a stated policy or in the culture to specifically say, you know, skip over Trump signs. But I am concerned about if there's not a proactive response to make sure that that isn't clear within the culture, that that kind of attitude should not be accepted at all. And I will point to this. FEMA's current strategic plan lists 3 goals. The first goal is to instill equity. We know that these DEI initiatives have had a discriminatory aspect in it. We've seen a lot of companies now having embraced it out of altruistic means, but understanding that what they do is they ask us to discriminate proactively. One of the things it mentions is this plan lists racial minorities, even religious minorities, as individuals who should be the beneficiaries of equity. So I would ask you, who's a religious majority, or a racial majority? Does FEMA make decisions about resources distributed according to these policies? Because this is in the strategic plan. And so whatever your case is on this, you're asking your employees to make distinguishment between individuals as opposed to just meeting a need. I tell people all the time in our office, we don't care who you are, we don't care what your voting record is, we don't care your background, your whatever. You walk into our office, as many offices here, even across the aisle, we're here to help and to help get your case through. I think that should be the very clear standing of FEMA, and I would encourage you to revise your strategic plan and rid it of all the DEI. We'll be addressing this actually in a markup, I think, tomorrow. But if you could do that, I think that would go a far way to making sure we have a proactive culture to where it's very clear so these isolated incidences don't pop up. Because what we didn't see in that text thread was any pushback on that either. And that should have been clear, like, no, we're not about that. That's not what FEMA's about. And I would encourage you to do that. I did want to ask about a couple things because sometimes I've noticed, and I don't think this is the intent, having, had my own experience with FEMA, but sometimes it seems that the process gets in the way of the people. And I will point in our own district, most of our districts rural. Sometimes you'd have a grant for $500,000 for a rural community. They're having to go through the same sort of process that in a large metroplex, somebody with a $20 million project is going through. Very often it was point of contacts were very difficult. I know one place that had 7 site visits. It was a different team every time. They had to start the process over and over again because staff kept changing and these sorts of things. I was talking to someone even yesterday, and I've had a number of conversations with someone who's on the ground in North Carolina trying to help. And they listed a couple instances where you have people come out in the community, they put some resources together, they're trying to respond while FEMA's getting there and other resources, agencies are getting there. And FEMA would go in and they would, for example, be hosted in a place. FEMA would come out and rent out the place from underneath the people who are already doing recovery work, and they would confiscate the resources that were in that place and basically take over and kick the people out. There was this one group that basically were hiding their resources now because that had happened to them 3 times already. And so I would also caution you, there's other instances too where you have people trying to go and rescue and do recovery of their family, of their friends, of their neighborhoods who they know are trapped on a mountain, for example. And FEMA workers would stop them and prohibit them from going in to rescue them. And so again, in the aspect of guiding a culture, could you speak to what you are doing to ensure, in a sense, that you don't have, you mentioned some of them are temporary employees, that you don't have people who have this newfound authority who are actually prohibiting the work because it doesn't fit within their scope, and that we're making sure we put people before processes?
Chairman, I know we're over. Do I have time to answer?
Can you
Make it quick?
Yeah, make it quick.
My apologies. I've had a lot of experience with humans.
Yeah, Congressman. I mean, first, I just want to address that equity as a foundation of emergency management is part of my strategic plan, because I think it will also address some of your concerns, because I share your concerns. And when I was a local emergency manager, both in Colorado, but as well as in New York City, what I have experienced is the barriers that people have, good working people have, in trying to access the assistance that's available to them. And when I came into this position, my goal was to try to remove those barriers and make sure that everybody had access. That's the foundation of why we put equity in there. It wasn't a DEI initiative. It was about making sure all people can access the programs.
Minorities? Distinguishing between religious minorities
There's a
and majorities?
definition, as in the executive order, that is listed in there because that is the executive order. But our view on equity is making sure that
Why would you
we
even
have
ask?
consistent and fair treatment of all people and making sure that nobody is left behind. That has been our goal, and we have made transformational changes in our own policies and our regulations to help assist more people. And we've been able to provide more aid in the last 3 years because of these changes, because we focused on making sure that there were no barriers.
I'm going
to,
gentleman's time gone way over. Chair now recognizes Ms. Ocasio-Cortez from New York.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I think some of the points made earlier today, that disaster response and relief is historically and continues to be genuinely an area of bipartisan work. And my hope is that we can continue to protect these programs. In fact, one of the things that was brought up earlier, Administrator Criswell, was the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP. I'd previously served several terms on the Financial Services Committee, which also has jurisdiction over the authorizations around the National Flood Insurance Program. And a lot of people don't know that the maps for the NFIP and what is considered a flood zone or not are tied to flood maps from before the federal government even acknowledged that climate change is real. And so we are allocating flood insurance from before these areas became flood zones that are now flood zones. And so historically, there's been a great deal of Republican resistance to updating these maps. My hope is that we can do that now. But I wanted to move a little bit into your work and what we're seeing now in the current information environment, especially after a disaster. Administrator Criswell, recently in North Carolina and with these storms and hurricanes that have hit this year, there have been very large-scale moments of disinformation regarding FEMA, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
One of those that I've just seen is this idea that, and I'm going to ask you if this is true or not, and I apologize that I even have to ask you some of these things, but I think it's important for the American people to see in a setting like this, where we have to swear to tell the truth, that we see officially on the record that these things are not true. The first being that the suggestion that FEMA assistance was only a $750 loan that would have to be paid back, and if not, FEMA would seize the homes of everyday people who may not be able to make that back in such a catastrophic moment. Is that correct?
That is completely inaccurate.
Completely false, correct? But was it in your assessment, and did you see lots of people believing this on the ground or in the field?
I was on the ground for over 3 weeks in North Carolina, and I did hear from people on the ground asking me, is this real or is this not real?
Another one that I also saw very widely circulated, that FEMA did not have enough money to provide relief services because that allocation of funds went to either undocumented immigrants, aid to Ukraine, or even aid to the Israeli government. Is that correct, that FEMA's funds were allocated away to those causes?
Completely inaccurate.
Completely false. On the record, completely false, correct?
Correct.
And other things that we've seen as well, that it's standing policy for FEMA to politically discriminate. We know that that's not true, correct?
Correct.
And there was an incident, we see, but that individual was fired, and that this is not a policy at scale, correct?
Correct.
Now, we know that these are important pieces, very large and influential pieces of disinformation, but I want to talk about the harm of that. Because if you are a FEMA worker canvassing door to door, you need to knock on people's doors and see what help they need, correct?
Yes.
Now, I know, as someone who's a target of large amounts of misinformation and disinformation, people will sometimes, and I genuinely want to separate this from a partisan accusation, but it is very important to say that if someone thinks that a FEMA official is coming to their house to take their house away, that's a situation that could be escalatory or potentially become violent over something that's not true, correct?
Correct.
I mean, I've had people that have come to me in an escalatory way because they've believed something about me on the internet that was completely false. And that's just me, let alone an anonymous FEMA official who does not have the same level of resources to be able to combat that kind of misinformation. And then on top of that, when people do believe these kinds of things, what is the harm to the communities that then get convinced of these mistruths?
I think, Congresswoman, one of the best stories that I can share with you was when I was in Chimney Rock, North Carolina, and I was talking to the leadership there. And Chimney Rock is the area where there were accusations that there were physical threats to our FEMA staff, where we temporarily moved all of our staff into fixed locations. When I talked to that leadership team there, they said, this is not who we are. This is looking bad on my community. Tourists may not want to come visit my community, but let alone we need your help. The people in this community need to register for assistance, and now we have to make sure that they understand that the government is there to help them and encourage them to apply for assistance so they can start their road to recovery. I think that is a really good example of how it not just impacts an individual, but impacts an entire community and their reputation and who they believe they are, and now who the public writ large thinks they are.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Gentlelady's time's expired. They have called votes. They called votes about 10 minutes ago, but we're going to have one more questioner, and then we'll recess for votes. But Chair now recognizes for the last question before recess the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This hearing has been all over the place, from climate change to politics to somewhat on the issue at hand. And I want to ask you, Administrator Criswell, has FEMA made any attempt to identify the people discriminated against because of their support for President Trump?
The actions of this individual were unacceptable, and
that's not what I asked.
we do not have any evidence at this point that shows that this was a larger issue, but there are ongoing investigations.
I've only got a few minutes. No, ma'am. I'm asking, there were clearly people who were passed over.
Correct.
Okay. Have you made any attempt to identify those people?
Oh, those people that were passed over?
Yes, ma'am.
We sent another team in there, and they have made contact with everybody in that community.
So what is FEMA prepared to do to meet the needs of those people who were discriminated against?
If they registered for assistance or needed assistance, they are now in the system and will get whatever they are eligible for.
Okay. And those are people who have applied that notified you that they were passed over, or did you discover them by other means?
When we looked at the records from this employee's team and found the homes that were skipped, we sent a team in there to contact all of those homes. I can't tell you if they all applied for assistance. I don't know that they all needed assistance, but we at least gave them the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. This is not the first time, though, that FEMA's had an issue with discrimination, because for years FEMA discriminated against houses of worship. It wasn't until a lawsuit was brought by 3 churches in Texas and 2 synagogues in Florida that this stopped. Are you aware of that?
I am not familiar with the lawsuit that you're mentioning.
Are you aware that FEMA has had an issue with interacting with religious groups and
I am not.
Churches? I think it's an unfortunate part of FEMA's history. And it seems that I can understand why there's a built-in political bias for FEMA employees in Washington, because only about 6.5% voted of the vote for president and the Washington, D.C. went to Trump. But I want to ask you something else. And I want to go back to the questions that Congressman Jordan asked, Chairman Jordan asked, and that those people who were on that chat group that witnessed the directive to volunteers, I'm not sure you gave a satisfactory answer as to whether or not you've contacted those people and what information you've gotten from them. Have you tried to do that?
As I said before, I have not personally talked to them, but there are ongoing investigations.
So will you state for the record that the investigators are contacting those people to get their information?
The investigators should be contacting them, and if they haven't, I will ensure it.
If you maintain that FEMA took swift and satisfactory action after Mrs. Washington's team's message, why do you think the whistleblower felt compelled to reveal her message to the public?
I can't speak on behalf of the whistleblower. I know that I was made aware of the situation on November 7th. I received confirmation that this text message had been sent on November 9th, and I directed her termination. It was not acceptable behavior. It is not how we want to treat people.
I understand what you're saying publicly, but what matters is what you're doing in the investigation, what you're doing privately to clean this up, and to create a culture of respect for all people. And I really don't care if they're Republican or Democrat. I don't care their religious affiliations. I think the role of FEMA is to provide aid when necessary. And I just want to be sure that there's substantial proof that you can offer the American people today that taxpayers who pay their hard-earned dollars to provide for these disaster response resources will not face future political discrimination from FEMA. Can you give us absolute assurance of that?
Congressman, we are here to help all people.
I know, but you didn't.
And I can assure you that we will take action against anyone who has not followed our core values of compassion, fairness, integrity, and respect. We treat everybody the same. Everybody is eligible for assistance.
We're counting on you doing that. And I would like to identify with Mr. Moskowitz. I thought that his perspective on the need to reorganize FEMA and Homeland Security was spot on. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to the previous order, the chair declares the committee in recess. Subject to the call of the chair, we plan to reconvene 10 minutes after the conclusion of votes, so the committee stands in recess.